Lab-grown meat was supposed to save the planet. A peer-reviewed study from the University of California, Davis found it might be worse for the climate than conventional beef. That is not a headline from the cattle industry. That is the finding of academic researchers. And by the time you finish this video, you are going to understand exactly why and what it has to do with the ingredient list that nobody in this conversation is talking about. Here is your transformation. You are going to leave here understanding the specific mechanism that makes cultivated meat more carbon-intensive than conventional beef under current conditions, why the companies behind it do not lead with that information, and what the ingredient count, 4 for real beef and 17 to 40 plus for lab beef, has to do with the environmental story. That last part is the piece almost no coverage gets to. Let us get into it. Lab-grown meat was built on a single foundational argument. It would dramatically reduce the environmental cost of producing animal protein. This was not a side claim. It was the thesis. The Good Food Institute, the primary advocacy organization for the cultivated meat industry, published projections estimating up to 78% lower greenhouse gas emissions compared to conventional beef, along with 92% less land use. Those projections attracted over $3 billion in investment. They were also based on theoretical, optimized production at scale, not on measured data from actual facilities, because no commercial-scale facilities existed when the projections were made. In 2023, researchers at UC Davis published a peer-reviewed study in the journal Future Foods that did something the industry projections had not done. They modeled the long-term climate impact of cultivated meat production using realistic assumptions about the energy inputs required. The finding was not what the marketing suggested. Depending on the energy source used to power production, the study found that cultivated meat could generate a global warming impact 4 to 25 times higher than conventional beef, measured over a 1,000-year time frame. This product was sold to your generation on the promise of climate salvation. So what is actually going on inside that number, and why does the ingredient list explain it? Here is the mechanism, and this is the part I want you to screenshot because I do not think most people have had it explained this clearly. Cattle produce methane. Methane is a potent greenhouse gas, significantly more warming per molecule than carbon dioxide in the short term. But methane breaks down in the atmosphere in approximately 12 years. The climate damage from conventional beef is real, but it is time-limited. Cultivated meat production requires something called pharmaceutical-grade growth media, a sterile liquid cocktail of amino acids, sugars, salts, vitamins, and growth factors that feeds the animal cells multiplying in the bioreactor. Producing that growth media to pharmaceutical purity is extraordinarily energy-intensive, and the energy used in that purification process under current grid infrastructure releases carbon dioxide, which does not break down in 12 years. Carbon dioxide persists in the atmosphere for hundreds to thousands of years. So you are trading a gas that clears in a decade for a gas that stays for a millennium. That is what the UC Davis researchers measured, and that is what your ingredient list is actually telling you. Now here is where it gets more complicated, and I want to be fair to the full picture before you drop your comment. The UC Davis study is one study with specific assumptions about energy infrastructure. The researchers are explicit that if cultivated meat production were powered entirely by renewable energy, the long-term climate picture would improve significantly. The industry response to the study has been to argue that the transition to clean energy makes the finding less relevant over time. That is a legitimate point. But here's the problem with that response. The product is being sold and approved and marketed right now, under current energy infrastructure, with claims that are based on projections that assumed ideal future conditions. Your purchase decision is happening in 2026, not in a hypothetical future where every bioreactor runs on solar. And the ingredient list is part of why. Real beef reaches your plate through 4 inputs: the animal, feed, water, and land. Those 4 inputs have real environmental costs that are well documented. Cultivated meat requires a growth medium with between 17 and 40 plus distinct documented inputs, depending on the company and product format. It also requires a scaffolding material to give the muscle tissue its shape and texture, because cells grown in liquid form a paste rather than structured meat. And in many current production processes, antibiotics are used to prevent contamination in the bioreactor. The proprietary formulations of the growth media used by Upside Foods and Good Meat, the two companies that received USDA approval in June 2023, are classified as trade secrets. They do not appear on any public label. So when you buy cultivated meat, your label tells you what came out of the process. It does not tell you what went in. That is not unique to cultivated meat. It is the same structural gap this channel covers every week. But it is especially worth noting in a product whose entire market position rests on a claim about what the process does to the planet. Here is where your thinking should land after this video. I do not want to leave you with a verdict. I want to leave you with a framework. The question of whether cultivated meat is good for the environment is not settled. The University of California, Davis finding is important and underreported, and you now understand the mechanism. It is also one study. What is settled is this: the environmental claims that drove $3 billion of investment were made ahead of the data. The data, when it arrived, was more complicated than the marketing. And the ingredient list, the full upstream input story, not just the final product label, is where the complexity lives. Now, I want to know your answer. Did you buy the environmental argument for lab meat before watching this? Drop your honest answer in the comments. And one more question before I close, because this one I genuinely want to debate. If a product's environmental case depends on an energy infrastructure that does not yet exist, should it be marketed as an environmental solution right now? There is no obvious answer. Your perspective belongs in the comments, and I will be reading them. If this video changed how you think about the cultivated meat conversation, or gave you the specific mechanism to explain the UC Davis finding to someone who has only seen the investment headlines, subscribe right now. Every video on this channel is built on the same foundation: the actual study, the actual ingredient list, and no agenda in either direction. Hit the bell. The algorithm does not reliably surface new uploads from channels you follow, and the bell is the only guarantee you see the next one. Share this with someone who is enthusiastic about lab meat for environmental reasons, not to change their mind, but because they deserve the complete picture alongside the compelling one. I will see you in the next one.